Hi, I'm Father Chris Alar of the Marian Fathers here at the National Shrine of the Divine Mercy, and happy birthday to the United States of America. In just 2 days, we will celebrate the 250th anniversary of our nation's founding, an incredible landmark event that commemorates our nation, our history, and our religion. Of course, the theme of every Independence Day is always freedom. But have you stopped to think, what kind of freedom are we actually celebrating? Is it the freedom to do whatever we want to do, or the freedom to do what we ought to do? Well, depending on whom you ask, the answer may or may not be so obvious. So tonight, on this special Independence Day edition of Living Divine Mercy, we are going to take a different look at the topic of freedom from that which you usually see in documentaries and on television. This is a freedom based on God. Our starting point is going to be a simple phrase used by one of our most beloved presidents, Abraham Lincoln. Referring to our nation, President Lincoln's little-known phrase, "under God," in the Gettysburg Address, actually opens a door straight into the Catholic understanding of freedom. In just 2 words, he hints that a nation's liberty can only be secure when it recognizes a higher authority than itself. That basic intuition is exactly what the Church teaches. True freedom is not doing whatever we want, but living in the truth of who we are before God. Imagine the scene at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, in November 1863. A nation torn apart by civil war, fields still fresh with the blood of the dead, and Abraham Lincoln standing up to explain what all the killing means. In just 2 minutes, he sketches a vision of the United States as a union, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Then, near the end, he makes a crucial statement that aspires towards the hope that the nation should have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. On that day in Gettysburg, Lincoln speaks of one nation under God. That phrase is not rhetorical window dressing. It signals that the equality and freedom he's talking about are not simply the result of a majority vote in Congress or the will of the strongest, but are grounded in an order that precedes politics. Under God essentially means that there is a moral law, a natural law, and there is a creator, and our rights and dignity as people are received from that creator, not manufactured by us. That was the problem with the Enlightenment and why it was so dangerous. This is what our nation was founded on. In other words, through his concise statements, Lincoln is intuiting something that the Church states very explicitly. Freedom detached from God becomes self-destructive. Freedom lived under God can become life-enhancing and enduring. So exactly what does the Church say about freedom? Well, according to the Catechism, freedom is a fundamental gift from God, rooted in humanity's creation in his image and likeness. It is defined as the power, rooted in reason and will, to act or not to act, to do this or that, and so to perform deliberate actions on one's own responsibility. Through free will, humans shape their own lives and bear moral responsibility for their choices. Catholic teaching distinguishes true freedom from mere license, which is the ability to do whatever one desires. Authentic freedom is not freedom from all constraints, but freedom for the capacity to choose what is good, true, and just. It reaches its perfection when it's directed toward God, who is the ultimate good and source of true freedom and therefore true happiness. As the Catechism states, the more one does what is good, the freer one becomes. There is no true freedom except in the service of what is good and just. Yes, true freedom is not the choice to reject God or not. Oh, I have the choice to reject God. No, it is the ability of being able to worship God in the first place, what is right. Again, real freedom isn't doing whatever we want. It is the ability to do what we ought to do, what is right. So here's the key point. Submission to God's authority is not the enemy of freedom. It's the foundation of freedom. God's commandments are not chains. They are guide rails that keep freedom from driving off the cliff. We do not lose our dignity by acknowledging a Lord above us. We finally receive it in its fullness when we do. When Lincoln says, under God, he's glimpsing this truth at the level of a nation. The church proclaims it at the level of the individual soul. So the two are connected. And here's another thing that is very important. There is a strong connection between divine mercy and freedom. Why? Because divine mercy is God's response when we misuse our freedom. How? Well, sin is precisely understood as the misuse of freedom. It's what happens when we say, my will be done, rather than thy will be done. And here is the irony. The more we go against God's authority and follow our own will, the less freedom we actually have. We get enslaved to our passions, to lust, to anger, to greed, or to resentment. And it destroys us. Jesus tells us plainly in the gospel that this will happen when he says, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. Now, divine mercy enters that slavery, not to excuse it, but to forgive and heal it. Jesus tells St. Faustina that the greatest sinners have the greatest right to his mercy, because mercy is the medicine for misused freedom, washing us clean and strengthening our hearts so that we can begin to choose the good again. In this sense, mercy can be applied as the basis of Lincoln's hope for a new birth of freedom. This rebirth of freedom pointed to a type of moral rebirth, especially in how the nation treated those made in God's image. For slavery was the great national sin of his time, enshrined in law. And Lincoln knew the nation had to face God's justice because of it. And in its hope for the future, especially needed his mercy to heal and change. Actually, in our own time, with legalized sins like the destruction of unborn life, attacks on God-given human dignity and human rights, attacks on the nature of marriage and the family, and the stripping of our religious liberty, we too are misusing freedom. We do those things in the name of freedom, but it is a misuse of that freedom against the weakest. And we must beg God's mercy so that this generation of Americans may not lose that precious freedom God has given us. So what does this reflection mean for us as we stand just 2 days away from the 250th anniversary of our nation's founding? I think there are 3 things for us to consider. First, we must let the words under God purify our idea of freedom. We need to stop thinking of freedom as limitless choices and start seeing it as the beautiful power by which we choose the good by living according to the truth, even when it is difficult. Second, we must examine whether our own use of freedom is actually in rebellion against God's law. Oh, you have your truth, I have my truth. No, God is the truth. And so, whether in personal morals, family life, or public positions, we must keep this in mind. Being under God is not just a phrase for politicians. It is a description of an objective reality that we are to conform to. And third, as citizens, without becoming partisan, we must bring our faith into the public square. That means defending life, marriage, and religious liberty, not because we want to impose Catholic rules, but because we want our laws to respect the God-given dignity of every human person. Real patriotism is not blind. It is willing to call the nation back under God's law for the sake of its own soul. Towards the end of his presidency, Lincoln deeply understood that the United States, to be a nation genuinely under God, would have to become a country where freedom is measured not only by rights asserted, but by truth honored and responsibility accepted. Again, something we are losing. The church, too, understands this and knows that a freedom that rejects God and his authority will destroy itself. Thus, it always calls the human person to live his or her freedom under God, under his authority, under his truth, and under his mercy. In this way, we will find a path towards justice, towards mercy, towards healing, towards living in freedom as children of God and in peace, towards being fully alive and free in Jesus Christ. This is truly the freedom that we want to celebrate and hope for this July 4th. So, in the spirit of the 250th birthday of our nation, we want to do something special to commemorate this momentous and almost once-in-a-lifetime event. To do so, we have put together a 4-part series called the Marian Route to USA 250, One Nation Under God's Mercy. It will be featured on our Human Interest segment of this show. In this series, Father Mark Barron will explain to you how devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary actually influenced the founding and expansion of the United States of America. Wow. Filmed on location, Father Mark will bring you some very interesting facts and features about the Marian dimensions of our country's early history. It's truly amazing, as I said. So here's Father Mark to introduce you to this special series.
I'm standing here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, near the Gettysburg National Military Park, the ground where two of the most important events in American history took place, the Battle of Gettysburg and Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. From July 1st through July 3rd in 1863, the Gettysburg battlefield was where Union forces finally broke the momentum of General Robert E. Lee's Confederate Army and stopped his invasion of the North. Militarily, Gettysburg was the Confederacy's best and last real chance to win big in the Civil War, and their eventual defeat here kept the United States from being split in two. On November 19th of that same year, on this same ground, Lincoln returned to dedicate a cemetery where the many thousands who died in that battle were laid to rest. Instead of a long speech, he gave a brief 2-minute reflection that helped save the Union in another way, by giving a deeper meaning to the war and to the nation itself. In just 272 words, the Gettysburg Address did indeed honor the fallen. But Lincoln also did something more. He took the moment to redefine the Civil War as a great test of whether this nation could survive, be purified, and experience what he called a new birth of freedom. He was not simply trying to keep the country together for political reasons. Rather, he truly believed the United States was a test case for whether democracy itself could endure. If it broke apart, it might suggest that self-government cannot work. If it endured, it would show that a nation built on freedom and equality can last. What frames the speech and gives it its ultimate meaning is a short phrase we tend to easily miss: under God. Lincoln used those two words near the end of his talk when he said that this nation under God shall experience a new birth of freedom. His grammatical use of under God is important because it modifies the word nation, and tells us what kind of nation the United States is. That it is a nation that exists, like every nation, under God's authority and, in a more specific sense, under God's providence. Interestingly, under God does not appear in Lincoln's pre-delivery drafts. Evidence suggests he added it on the spot. In that moment, he seemed compelled to make clear that the entire experiment of the United States lives and acts under God's sovereign rule. By placing the nation explicitly under a higher moral authority, Lincoln subtly shifted the meaning of the conflict. The Union's cause was no longer just about power, territory, or even national survival. It was about whether this people, who professed that all men are created equal, would stand as faithful to that truth before the God who is Lord of history, who judges nations, and who mysteriously guides all things, including those events marred by evil and suffering, to their proper good. Seen this way, under God names the horizon of divine providence within which a government of the people, by the people, for the people will either perish from the earth or be in some measure reborn and reordered to a greater good. So at a moment when the Union was fragile and its future uncertain, Lincoln asked Americans to see their story from God's perspective, to read their history, their sins, their sacrifices, and their hopes as part of a plan greater than themselves. He called them back to their beginnings, to the Declaration of Independence and the founding ideas, and asked them to move forward in the light of those truths, but to do so with a sense of being as a nation under God's authority, under God's judgment, under God's mercy, under God's providence. It was Lincoln's growing faith, especially in the providence of God, that allowed him to see the Civil War from this perspective, and so situate the story of the United States as being a part of a larger divine drama which was unfolding beneath the sovereign hand of a just and merciful God. I present this reflection on Lincoln's Gettysburg Address because as the United States celebrates her 250th birthday, I want to invite you to reflect more deeply on the true origins of this nation. I want to invite you to go back to our beginnings, back to our foundations on which our country was actually built. Not focusing merely on the political events of 1776, but similarly to Lincoln, on the spiritual and providential forces that not only formed our Union, but also prepared this land long before we declared independence from England. In this light, we can ask questions like these. How has God been at work in the story of this land? What if the same divine providence Lincoln trusted during the Civil War was already at work centuries earlier, long before the war, long before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, guiding the very discovery and settlement of the New World? What if that providence worked through people of other nations in the exploration and colonization of the Americas? What if it was part of God's plan that many of those people were members of the Catholic Church? What if divine providence chose to work in a special way through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus, to influence the evangelization of the entire American continent? And what if that same providence gave the Virgin Mary an influential role in the founding and expansion of what would become the United States of America? What would that mean for how we understand ourselves and our origins as a nation? Over the next few weeks, we're going to allow these questions to inspire a look at a hidden but beautiful dimension of American history. That is the profound and oftentimes hidden influence the Blessed Virgin Mary has had on the discovery, evangelization, and settlement of the lands that has become the United States, and how that influence contributed to the eventual founding and expansion of our nation. We will do this by following the three great European streams of Catholic and Marian influence that helped to discover and establish life in the New World. Each story is distinct, with its own saints and sinners, yet together they show how a Marian thread has been woven in the tapestry of our great country. Long before there was a United States, the cross was planted on this soil. Long before the Stars and Stripes flew over these fields, missionaries and settlers from Catholic nations were praying the rosary, celebrating Marian feast, and entrusting this land and its peoples to the care of the Mother of God. In other words, if we truly want to understand how this nation grew under God, we must also tell the story of how it grew under Mary's mantle. Now, most of us have never heard that story in school. When we think of the founding of our country, we picture Protestant England, Quaker Pennsylvania, and Virginia planters. When we think of expansion, we picture covered wagons, pioneers, and the frontier. All of that is real and important, but it is not the whole truth. Standing here, where Lincoln expressed a hope that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, we can hear an invitation. If we desire that new birth of freedom today, if we want healing of our division and greater fidelity to the truth that all are created equal, we must look honestly at where we came from under God. That means telling the full story, not only the Protestant and Enlightenment roots that we know well, but also the Catholic and Marian roots we have largely forgotten. In the episodes that follow, we will look more closely at the English, Spanish, and French Catholic stories and ask, how did devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary shape the Catholic Church in this land through them? And how did that same church, through her children and her missions, quietly shape the United States, whose union Lincoln fought to preserve? My hope is that, by the end, we will see our country's history with clearer eyes, more grateful for the many ways God has been at work here, more honest about our failures to live up to the light we have been given, and more ready, under God and under Mary's patronage, to seek our new birth of freedom in our time. Father Chris, back to you.
Well, thank you, Father Mark, for that beautiful introduction to our special new series. What a powerful reminder that from the very beginning, Our Lady has had a special place in the story of our nation. And speaking of powerful witnesses to faith, purity, and forgiveness, we now turn to the story of one of the youngest saints in the church whose feast day is coming up, Saint Maria Goretti.
Hi, I'm Brother Jeff, and I'm with the Marians of the Immaculate Conception, and this is Saints in Focus. Saint Maria Goretti was born on October 16, 1890, in Corinaldo, Italy. On July 5, 1902, Maria was sitting on the steps outside of her home sewing one of her siblings' shirts. Also, living in the house with her family was her father's business partner's son, Alessandro Serenelli. He noticed Maria outside sewing and tried to seduce the young Maria. While Maria refused his temptations, Alessandro grabbed her from the steps and dragged her inside the home. He tried to assault her, but Maria fought back and cried out that it was a mortal sin and warned him that he would go to hell. When Alessandro persisted, she fought him and screamed, "No, it is a sin. God does not want it." Alessandro started to choke her, and she said that she would rather die than submit. Then he pulled out a knife and started stabbing her. Alessandro fled the home, and shortly after Maria's family returned, they found her bleeding on the floor and took her to the nearest hospital in Nettuno, where she had surgery without anesthesia. Her stab wounds were so severe the surgeon couldn't help. The next day, Maria expressed that she forgave Alessandro and wanted him to be in heaven with her. She died that day while holding a cross to her heart and looking at an image of Our Lady. Alessandro was captured shortly after. While in prison, Alessandro had a dream that he was in a garden with Maria. She walked over to him and handed him beautiful lilies, which immediately burned to ashes in his hands. When he woke up from the dream, he converted. He repented for his crimes and lived a pious life. 27 years later, when he was released, he went straight to Maria's mother and begged her for forgiveness, which she gave, saying, "If my daughter can forgive him, who am I to withhold forgiveness?" The cause for her was opened after being credited for about 40 miracles after her death. She was canonized by Pope Pius XII in 1950 as the patron saint of forgiveness. At her canonization, in a ceremony at St. Peter's Basilica, her family was accompanied by Alessandro Serenelli, who later became a lay brother of the Order of Friars Minor Capuchin. He lived in a monastery and worked as its receptionist and gardener until his death. Saint Maria Goretti is a role model for all of us to follow to Christ. Saint Maria Goretti, pray for us.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us this week for this special Independence Day episode. Let us continue to pray for peace in our nation and for our country and for the unity in the church as we strive to become one nation under God's mercy. And please be with us next week as we'll speak on an American saint whose feast day is also coming up, Saint Kateri Tekakwitha. So until then, may Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.